Now, another matter is the proposal of a 70% tax windfall on realized profits made by Nigerian banks. We've had several perspectives shared on this. Now, let's speak to the managing partner, Transact Partners. Mr. Eben Jones joins us in the studio to also share the perspective of Transact at this time. Good afternoon, Mr. Eben.
Thank you, Ini.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've seen or heard some people say, well, this is good. If the banks have made some extra profit, it should be captured back into the economy for developmental use. And, well, of course, a lot of the bank players are not happy with this, especially when it was moved from 50 to 70%. But what has Transact seen?
I think for us, it's not so much about the rates, right? Whether it's 50% or 70%, but about the principles and about whether a windfall tax is a good thing in the first place. You know, companies are capitalist in nature. They would allocate their capital based on what gives them the highest return. I'll give you an example of a company that grew as a result of massive changes in policies or in the world. Take pre-COVID, a company called Zoom was not widely known. During COVID, their stock price rose by close to 1,000% or more. And they're not the only ones. There were other companies that were engaged in things like food delivery. There is a major one in the US called DoorDash. They all used that opportunity to transform their business and capture tremendous value for their economy. Don't forget that one of the ways we measure the size of our economy is the size of our stock exchange. You know, so my point is the windfall tax on banks in particular does not necessarily mean that we are capturing value for the economy when we tax them. There's something else that we like to talk about. In today's world, it's all about sustainability. You know, in fact, in accounting today, sustainability standards are some of the things we are requiring companies to comply with. Now, when you impose a windfall tax, it is supposed to be a one-off windfall tax because something happened, and you want to invest it in infrastructure, that is not sustainable because in subsequent years, when perhaps that infrastructure is not fully built, you've opened a line of expenditure that you need to continue to fund.
But other countries do windfall tax. No, in the UK, for instance, you know, when the oil companies were having a boom, I think that was during COVID or so, or last year, there was windfall tax, you know, and it's supposed to be a way of, you know, getting back the excess into the economy.
Yes, so it's always controversial. And I think what you mean is, not the UK, is probably the EU, you know, imposed a new windfall tax on oil companies sometime in 2022. But before then, sometime between 1980 and 1989, the US had a similar windfall tax on oil companies, for example. And the net impact of the studies shows that the impact, and they had to cancel it in 1989, that the overall impact of that was not good for the economy. You know, so, but in our own case, this tax creates more questions than answers. The first one is the banks have already paid, say, 30% or, you know, slightly over 30% on their income for the year. That income includes all income from all sources, which would include foreign exchange gains, realized foreign exchange gains in particular, you know. So, are they going to pay the differential between 30% and perhaps the 70% now? Or are they going to be paying a flat 70% on just this line of income? That's the first question. The second question would be, the Central Bank of Nigeria recently requested banks to recapitalize their, you know, and the banks are going to the market asking people to subscribe to new offers. There are other ways of keeping this money in the system. For example, could the government have thought about us not distributing this income so that it is within the system and used to build the economy? We could simply say, you made excess gains on foreign exchange when the naira, the devaluation, or the naira was allowed to float. This amount of profit you made, leave it perpetually in your balance sheet. It's not distributable. It's not income.
I think they did say that, because there was a time the CBN sent warning to banks, not to depend so much on
the foreign exchange.
Yes, so they did
yes.
that.
So without if the CBN is allowed them to treat that as capital, for example, many of the banks will not be going to the market to ask.
Yeah, but the essence of the recap is to bring in new capital.
But that is already capital that is there.
Exactly. It's an existing capital in the system. But the CBN wants new capital from outside the system.
Well, so what I'm saying is that in my head and what I think, this is part of the things that are further stifling this economy. You could ask yourself and say, what are the major areas of production in our economy right now? Is there any sector that you think is booming or doing well right now in Nigeria outside of financial services? And if financial services are the only one that seems to be doing well because they were sitting on some amount of foreign exchange, and then when the value of that foreign exchange rose, they made, in quote, artificial profit. That if they sold it, it becomes realized profit. Now, are there other ways to keep this within the economy without us taxing it and taking it further from the hands of private sector people?
So what are the other ways that you suggest of using this extra profit so that you have a larger number of the population of Nigeria feeling the impact?
So, like I said, let it be available as undistributable capital for the banks. And you would watch the banks, grow naturally. You have more credit available for genuine businessmen, rather than you take the money in cash from the banks and you give it to politicians. You and I know that when government says something is going to be spent on infrastructure, a lot of it ends up in private pockets.
Yeah, we don't have proof for that for this. We don't have proof of that for this, Mr. Eben. Yes. So let's stick to what we can prove. And
yes, but that is factual that our ranking in the global corruption index is still very high. So my point is, anything going into the hands of the government is better to have private sector continue to lead in strengthening our economy. Our country can only survive when we strengthen the hands of private sector players.
All right, Mr. Eben Joels, Managing Partners, Transact Partners, thank you so much. I'm sure your views also added up there to the conversations on the windfall tax. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.